Hello, and welcome to the Hope Relentless Marriage Podcast. This is Sarah, Gale, and Chad, and we are so happy that you're tuning in. I want to just congratulate you on the fact that you are being intentional about your marriage, listening to this podcast. Remember, marriages impact families. Families impact communities, and communities impact the world. So, what you are doing is a big deal. You are literally changing the next generation by just investing in your marriage. So, well done.
Yeah, it's so good. I was just talking with a friend, and we were talking about consistency. And for those of you that show up and listen each week, consistency, the quote I saw was consistency is what transforms average into excellence. And so just excited that you're here. We're excited to be here. This helps us continue to grow as individuals and in our marriage as well. And that's what we're all about, trying to become the best versions of ourselves and encouraging the people that are around us. So today we want to talk about this idea that your spouse is your teammate. So oftentimes in the day to day, we can lose sight of this and begin competing against our spouse instead of alongside of our spouse. And so it's so important to recognize your spouse is on the same team as you.
And this hits close to home for us because we are Bruins. And for those of you who possibly have been living under a rock and don't know what school is associated with the Bruins, that is UCLA, baby. And so we met there. Chad ran track and he was in these like hot pants, hot little shorts that actually fit me to this day. And I played soccer at UCLA. So we have that Bruin love going on. And so we played athletic sports our entire lives. So when it comes to this concept of teamwork, it is literally ingrained in us. Should we sing the fight song, Chad?
I mean, you're always into these things that feel silly to me, but sure.
U C
C
L A.
L A UCLA, fight, fight, fight.
That's
Well,
our alma mater.
we
You can
might
pick it
get
up.
kicked out of the alumni group with that rendition. The quality of commitment. Hopefully, you're more committed to your marriage than I was to the fight song in that moment. But you know what's interesting is, you talked about our background and being athletes, and competing can be a place of comfort for us, right?
Mhm.
But this concept of teamwork, when we were at UCLA, we wore uniforms. It was very clear to tell who was on your team. But you know what's interesting, within marriage, we can lose sight of who our teammates are pretty quickly. We
Mhm.
work with couples, and sometimes one spouse is on the same team as their work, and their
Yeah,
spouse is suddenly on a different team.
that's good.
Maybe it is one spouse is on the same team as the kids, which is a different team
Mhm.
than the other spouse. And so we can lose sight of being on the same team. I remember, as kind of a silly example, when we were early in our marriage, we literally would race to make the bet against each other, right? As if only one of us could win. And we would laugh. Usually it was pretty lighthearted. There may or may not have been cheating at times involved, with pillows thrown across the room in order to make the bed first.
Nice.
But, this idea of being on the same team as our spouse is kind of easy when we hear it, but it requires some awareness in different parts or different seasons of life to recognize, wait a minute, are we approaching this as a team on the same team would? Or are we approaching this where one of us wins and one of us loses?
Yeah. And when you think about it, it changes everything. I've spoken to a lot of different couples, and the primary facet, I guess, of Hope Relentless is that you are teammates. You are teammates. And obviously, that's because of our background, that's ingrained in us. And so it's something that we help couples to kind of, learn about and to see how that feels when they say, hey, you're my teammate. And a lot of couples just gravitate towards it, and it's revolutionary for them because they're realizing that it's not me versus Chad, in the relation of our marriage, or it's not them versus their spouse, but truly they are wearing the same jersey. And so sometimes even at the start of sessions, I'll even tell couples, "Hey, you guys need to find something that you can both have, that you can look to during this time that we are meeting together, because I want it to be the same." So whether it's a wristband, whether it's a fake tattoo or a real one. I mean, some
Yeah,
couples
real
have
one.
talked about getting real ones, but whatever it is, it's something to remind them that they are on the same team.
Yeah, and I think it's so important because it fundamentally changes how we approach the day to day. I think about, our sons play sports now as they're getting older. We spend more time as cheerleaders on the sideline than we do as athletes on the field of competition.
Mhm.
And when they play sports, you recognize there's going to be challenges. You recognize that there's an opponent who is trying to beat you. And so you wouldn't be surprised about that. And last week we talked about, should marriage take work? Of course, it takes work. But when we are on the same team, how we respond to challenges, how we respond to difficult moments, how we respond to an opponent competing in a way to have a negative impact on our marriage should show as a teammate. When you're watching a game, if a coach can call a timeout, the team meets together and comes up with a game plan so that they're all on the same team. One of the things that we love is that unity commands a blessing. When we are unified and understand what we're trying to accomplish, it makes a huge impact on moving forward together as a unit, as a team.
Yeah. And so we want to talk about some of the strengths of being a teammate and some of the things that come with that. And one of those strengths that comes with it is just the fact that you can do more together. When you
Yeah.
have a team, even in the individual sports, because Chad, you ran track, but you were on a team in the midst of your individual race, and you practiced with the team, and you could speak for yourself as far as how that team dynamic impacted you. But for me, playing soccer, it was significant because when we went through something hard together, a game, a championship, whatever it may have been, then you feel closer together because you fight together. You are grinding, you are taking personal responsibility for showing up your best because you know your team is counting on you. And in marriage, it's similar. It's so crucial for us to take personal responsibility for the things that we bring to the marriage. So we've talked about this in the past as well, as if we need some internal help as far as just different mental things that are happening, different emotional things that are happening, we need to get that help and be diligent to do it, because our teammate is looking at us to do what only we can do, which is grow ourselves and heal, go on the journey of healing the things that have been impacted negatively in us. And so the team, with the team, you can definitely do more.
Yeah, it's such a good point. You earlier this morning came home from the grocery store. That's like a simple example. Well, when we go out together and we unload the car and unload the groceries, it's easier and it happens faster. But imagine the impact on much more significant areas of life: raising kids, building a business, impacting your community and your neighbors. The reality is, we believe that God has given all of us different strengths and talents. Our natural personalities have some strengths and have some weaknesses. And when we work together, then we can create an environment where you're allowed to operate in your strengths and I'm allowed to operate in my strengths.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they are different. And so we can bring different skills and different talents into the marriage, into the home, into whatever it is that we are trying to accomplish as a team. And that's one of the benefits of viewing your marriage as a team and recognizing you're on the same team, because it creates that conversation of, okay, in sports, different players have different positions and they're working together. So it's the same thing in marriage with our strengths, with our personality differences. We can see and process information differently and bring and share that for the betterment of the team, for the betterment of the marriage.
Yeah, that's good. The exciting thing I think about a team is that there's always opportunity to grow. And
Yeah.
so the team is made up of a bunch of individuals, and let's say the team doesn't finish well for a season. Let's say the marriage is having a hard season of life, and the hope and the excitement is that we can always grow in our marriage. There's always new things we can learn. You guys listening to this podcast, you're growing. You're putting in the time to be a better teammate. And so that's exciting because it's not about our failures, even our successes. It's about the process. It's about being consistent, like Chad started the podcast off with, and recognizing that it takes intentionality and it takes growth consistently throughout to be the teammate and to have the marriage that we all want to have.
And I think that growth, a simple question we can all ask ourselves is, how can I be the best teammate I can be? Right? What
Mm-hmm.
makes a good teammate? I think of encouragement, right? When a
Yeah.
teammate is encouraging his teammates, that creates a positive environment. I think a teammate that works hard. I've played different sports at times where you're relying on a team and somebody's just not putting in effort, and that can be frustrating. So what's the opposite of that? Putting in effort, looking like you care. And so I think that can be a powerful action step people can consider is, how can you be a better teammate? And then begin to implement some of those things in the concept of your marriage, in the concept of your family. But we also recognize sometimes being a teammate can be challenging. When you think about a team, teams lose. They lose games. There's moments where the team had a mission, they had an objective, and like they didn't come through. The game ended and they lost. And those moments are difficult and frustrating. But the reality is, in family and in marriage, there's going to be moments where the result, the outcome, is disappointing. It could be, maybe the outcome is with your attitude. Maybe the outcome is how you responded to something. Maybe the outcome is frustrating because didn't show up to bring strength and leadership. So there has to be an environment of grace, right? I think that's something that can make a good teammate, is recognizing we're going to make mistakes. Our spouse is going to make mistakes. And so how do we manage? What are some of your thoughts, babe, in terms of what happens when the team suffers a loss or isn't competing the way that they had hoped to?
Yeah, the team needs to rally. It's one of those things where, okay, we lose and we can have a negative attitude. We can just say, okay, I'm done. This team is awful.
I'm out.
Or we can reassess, we can gather together and say, okay, what went wrong? What are some things that can be helpful in the future? And also, did I do what did I do my part? A lot of times we want to point the fingers at, oh, this, and we see it in our sons, right? Like sometimes it's human nature. It's like, oh, we lost because so and so didn't pass the ball or missed the goal or whatever it may be. It's like, no, no, no. It's not one, we're not pointing fingers at other people. It's not one person's fault per se. We are looking internally to see, okay, how could I have shown up better? And one thing I want to point out is there's this dynamic in marriage and in sports where, sure, you do your part. And we talk a lot about personal responsibility at Hope Relentless. But at the same time, sometimes we need to do more than our part. Like if you're on a team and someone's having an off game, because we all have off games in marriages, we
Yeah.
all have off days. That teammate, the other teammate that is having a regular game or whatnot, needs to come alongside that other teammate and encourage still and recognize, hey, we're not always on. We're not always 100%, but hey, I see you, I got you, and I'm still going to bring my A game. And it's the more I think about it, it is a brilliant illustration, I feel like, because in marriage, when one person isn't treating one person well, we often say, well, then I'm not going to treat you well.
Yeah.
Whereas when we think of a team, it's like if one person isn't playing well, they're off their game, we're not going to just say, well, then I'm not going to play well.
Yeah.
Or at least I hope not. So it all relates and points back to the fact that sometimes we do need to do more than our part, and that's okay. And I hope that we can expect that that will be a reality in our relationships.
Yeah, and maybe there's this concept of not just thinking about a team, but a championship team. If your marriage
Mhm.
was a championship team,
It's good.
what would it look like? Right? Because there are teams
Yeah.
that show up and they lose. Like they're bad
Mhm.
and they aren't getting better. That's not the type
Yeah.
of team we want to mimic or follow. We want to think of
Yeah.
our marriage as a championship level team. And, sometimes when we're working with couples, it's like they've both drawn a line in the sand and said, I'm doing my share, they're not. So the only way the
Mhm.
gap's going to get filled is when they do their share. And it turns into this blame game that you talked about. Well, a championship team recognizes it's not about me doing my share and them doing their share. Of course, that's the ideal environment, right? That's how the team maximizes its ability to compete, is when everybody shows up at their best at the same moment and they move forward. But injuries
Yeah.
happen in sports. Somebody could be
Mhm.
sick, somebody could be
Mhm.
injured. Something could be going on that is impacting their ability to contribute at the same level that maybe they just did a week or two ago. And that happens in life. Sometimes there's other things going on in our life that can distract us a little bit. And this is where championship teams kind of have this idea of next person up, right? Like, hey, they
Mhm.
were having an off day, so I wanted to step up and focus a little bit more in that season. I think for us, there's been different times where it's almost like the pendulum kind of swings, where one of us is maybe managing more of the stuff in the household, and then things begin to adjust and change, and then the other person is maybe managing more stuff in the household. But it's this idea of the team and not just the individual. And I think that's where marriages can get tricked up, when they get so focused on their individual self and what they want, and we lose
Mhm.
sight of how are we impacting the team framework of our marriage.
Yeah. And communication is important when it comes to that because, for example, when you talked about I went to the store today, if we didn't communicate what was going on, maybe you go to the store because we needed food. And
Yeah.
so even when we think of a team, there's positions, there's responsibilities, roles. And so we need to communicate as far as, okay, who's doing what? Because if we're all doing the same thing, then it's not going to go as far and we're going to be operating in things that might not even be useful, might not even be our gifts and our talents and all that. So when we have communication, we can position ourselves to be in the best position, if you will, and be in agreement with the team, with our spouse. And that there's power when there's agreement. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get into agreement about these things that can trip us up sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to transition this towards some action steps, and then we'll kind of wrap up this particular podcast. And so, if you're sitting here listening, what does it look like to operate as a team? I think the first thing is just to dialogue with your spouse around that. What does it look like to be a championship team for your family? Reflecting on that, talking about that will highlight some values, it'll highlight some targets for you. I think the next thing is teams have a mission. They have a goal that they're moving towards. And so I think that's an important action step. Find a target, something as a couple that you're working towards together, because that'll create common language and common direction. And then what is so fun when you're on the same team and you win the championship is being able to celebrate together. And so that's why
Mhm.
having goals and clear targets. I remember there was a season where we moved out of LA, moved to Arizona. We had some transitions in our careers. We had accumulated some debt that we didn't want. And you and I got on the same page. Hey, this season, we're going to live pretty lean because everything above our basic needs, we're going to pay off debt. And so
Mhm.
then, because there was agreement, when we accomplished that goal, like it was fun and we were able to celebrate. And then we moved towards a new goal of saving a down payment for a house, but it just created clarity. And so, one of those things, as you're talking about, what does it look like to be a championship team? Identify some targets that you and your spouse are both excited about and committed to moving towards together. And then the last
Mhm.
thing I would say is enjoy the journey. In a
Yeah.
game, a team might go up, they might go behind, but they continue to move forward. Enjoy the process, enjoy the journey, find little things to celebrate with your spouse. And so, those are kind of some practical action steps that we can take so we can start to implement some of these things in our day to day and begin to benefit from this reality that we are on the same team as our spouse.
All right. Well, I'm excited. I feel like we should go like play a sport or something.
Maybe we should go
This
wake
is
up the kids and beat them in basketball just so we can,
oh,
you
it's
know,
the best.
talk trash
We're
to the
still
kids.
our days are numbered when as far as how long we have left to beat the kids because as they're getting older
Yeah.
and we're getting older, it's going to shift. But I want to end with something we would tell the boys and we still tell them as far as when it comes to their own teams and competition and whatnot. We tell them to focus on three things. And those three things are to have a good attitude, to encourage your teammates, and to try your hardest. I
Yeah.
think those three things can sum up a lot of what we spoke about. And so just want to encourage you guys to enjoy the team that you're on. It's exciting. You're in an adventure with this person that you get to explore and you get to enjoy life with. And so just encourage one another and make sure that you are celebrating the small moments, even the smallest of small moments, but then of course the large ones. Celebrate your teammates, celebrate your team. And remember, no matter where you are in your marriage, there's always hope.